One Burgess, two Burgesses. I know it's a really strange word, but it's actually a familiar concept. A Burgess is a representative. So in Virginia, the House of Burgesses is the House of Representatives. Now that we have that out of the way, let's shoot back to 1765. Patrick Henry has just been elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses. He's 28 years old. He's the youngest Burgess in the entire colony, and Patrick Henry is ready to make some trouble. So he goes to his very first meeting, and the place is just buzzing with activity. Everyone is talking about the Stamp Act, which was just passed over in Great Britain. And the Stamp Act is a tax on paper in the colonies. And all these guys, all these Burgesses, they hate it. And so they're talking about, well, what are we going to do? And what are we going to do? Days and days pass, and most of them decide to do nothing. They literally just pack up their bags and they go home. So Patrick Henry is sitting there and he's looking around and he's like, wait a second, why is no one doing anything about the Stamp Act? So he figures he's going to do something. He proposes a resolution basically blasting the Stamp Act and saying, listen, British Parliament, you have no right to tax us, and any attempt to tax us is an effort to destroy British as well as American freedom. Now, this is actually a pretty controversial resolution. So Henry gets up to defend his resolution, and he gives like a fiery speech where he compares the British king, King George III, to Julius Caesar and a bunch of other guys who basically went on power trips and ended up getting assassinated. Now, when he says this, the whole house goes crazy. The Speaker of the House almost jumps out of his chair. Treason! He shouts at Patrick Henry. Then the call starts coming from every corner of the house. Treason! Treason! People are shouting at Henry, but he doesn't stop. He doubles down. If this be treason, he says, make the most of it. Now, Thomas Jefferson is kind of hanging out there. He's standing out by the door of the lobby. He's still a student. He's too young for Virginia politics, but he's listening, just kind of hanging out. He watches this entire show, and he later describes the debate as bloody and describes Patrick Henry as just the best speaker he's ever heard. He says, I heard the splendid display of Mr. Henry's talents as a popular orator. They were great indeed, such as I have never heard from any other man. So after Henry's speech, his resolution passes by just one vote. And Henry figures, you know what? It's probably time to get out of here before one of the older guys, harasses or arrests me. So he gets out and he goes home. Well, the minute he's gone, one of the older, most powerful Burgesses, this guy Peyton Randolph, makes a motion to strike Henry's resolution from the books. Like delete it, make it vanish, pretend it never happened. And that motion is successful. So Henry's resolution actually never makes it into the official records of the House of Burgesses. Well, Henry finds out, of course, he's pretty bummed about it. And he spends the next 8 or 9 years in the House, but he really decides to lay low and focus mostly on his personal affairs until 1774. Now, 1774 is a really interesting time in the colonies. The British have passed a tax on tea, which led to the Boston Tea Party, which led to the Intolerable Acts, which are a whole bunch of laws that Great Britain passed basically to punish the colonists for their little tea party. And so colonists are starting to get really furious about this thing. And, Henry decides to get in on the action. So he and a bunch of other Burgesses, they put together a resolution, a pretty tame resolution, calling for a day of fasting and prayer, mainly for the colonists in Boston, just to kind of show their support. Now, this makes its way to the governor. The governor hates it. He gets upset and shuts down the entire House of Burgesses. He dissolves them. He says, you're no longer allowed to meet. Well, now Henry's getting a little furious. His blood is starting to boil. And so he and his buddies, they say, okay, fine, no problem. We'll just go have secret meetings at the local pub. And that's exactly what they do. They get together the very next day at the Raleigh Tavern, and they pass a much stronger resolution. This time they call the taxes unconstitutional, and they say that Parliament has reduced the colonists to slavery by subjecting them to the payment of these taxes. They also call for a general congress of all the colonies to get together and sort of figure out how to respond to the Intolerable Acts. So 12 of the 13 colonies agree to have this General Congress, which they call the First Continental Congress, to figure out what to do about Great Britain, right? And the folks in Virginia asked Patrick Henry to take his talents to Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Of course, he goes and he gives a whole bunch of fiery speeches and tries to push for, toward independence. But folks are like, wait a second, we're not ready. We're not there yet. And so they take a much softer approach, and they just decide to send a letter to King George saying, hey, buddy, can you please take away these Intolerable Acts? The very next year, Virginia's House of Burgesses decides to have a secret meeting at St. John's Episcopal Church in Richmond, Virginia. This is called the Second Virginia Convention. And Patrick Henry shows up and he's like, look, man, by that point, he's had enough, right? So people are talking again. Well, what do we do with Great Britain? And what do we do about the Intolerable Acts? And Patrick Henry has a solution. He says, look, guys, we need to do two things. We need to raise an army and we need to get ready for war, right? So he proposes a resolution saying Virginia should raise a militia and be immediately put into a posture of defense. Now, some people love this. They think it's great. They think it's appropriate, right? The time has come. And other people think Henry is just absolutely insane. They're saying, look, man, you're going to push Great Britain, the world's most powerful country, into a war. Do we really want to do that? And so Patrick Henry rises from his pew and he asks everyone to support his motion. And he gives one of the most passionate and powerful and famous speeches in American history. He says, the war is inevitable and let it come. I repeat, let it come. Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Thomas Jefferson, who's now in the House of Burgesses, he's in the room, he stands up, overcoming his fear of public speaking, and he supports Henry's resolution. When the vote is taken, it passes by just 5 votes. And Virginia basically starts preparing for war against Great Britain. So before going home, these guys have one more thing to do. They have to pick 7 representatives to the Second Continental Congress. And so they take a vote and they pick these guys. It's almost unanimous. Every one of these guys gets almost unanimous support. And Thomas Jefferson picks up 18 votes, which is just enough to have him named as the alternate, like the backup in case one of these guys can't make it. Now, these guys have no idea that the world is about to change. The Second Continental Congress is going to be where George Washington is picked as commander-in-chief. It's going to be where Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence. The real revolution is about to begin, and we'll talk about that in the next video.